Trapped and unable to escape, Sid, Ptonomy, and Carrie's female half delve into David's past to try and find the keys to rescue him. But David's memories are uncertain territory, and figuring out what actually is real is a journey unto itself. We're diving deep down the rabbit hole on this week's episode of Legion, Chapter 4. Hey everyone, D here, and welcome to this week's review of Legion. So, of course, we're entering the mind realm of spoilers. It's your warning. Alright, so, amazing episode this week. Wow, very dense, lots of stuff going on, and I have to say, probably one of the best opening sequences of a show that I have seen in a long while. A wonderful and perfect use of a narrator. Now, narration, opening a story with a narration is very tricky business. It tends to take away a lot of the story. Most film and television is visual storytelling. We want to see things. We don't want someone to come up and tell us. But this is an exception to this. This is really harkening back to kind of the classical use of the narrator in the Greek sense with the Fates, or the chorus in Shakespearean. This is a character that is introducing us to the problem, framing the tale, and then telling us how that is going to develop and come along. And this, in the case of this show, in the guise of Oliver Bird, Melanie's not dead husband, but apparently stuck in a long coma, kind of trapped in the astral plane, much like David ends up being. But the whole opening sequence, I think it is great because it really sets up the queries for the episode and everything moving forward, and how tales are told. And that this particular tale is not just emotional or just fear-based, it is really a blending of the two. And that lets us into, that preps us for the ride that this episode takes us through, and it is quite a ride. Oh, and for all you actors out there, that's your next monologue. All right, so after that, Sid sort of takes over narrator duties, and again, in sort of an appropriate way, not taking away from the story, but building it, explaining the journey that they are going on. In their case, of course, having to dive into David's memories, into David's past, to figure out something that will release him. What is it that he is trapped for? And through this, they start to discover very quickly, and we even get in the narration over from Sid in the beginning, is diving into David's memories. David's memories are uncertain territory. And through that, it's very difficult to figure out what is real and what is fake. Because his memories are manufactured, in the sense an actual event has happened, and fake memories have been created in order to cover up those instances. One, it explains all the little mind traps and glitches and stuff that Ptonomy has been running into as they've been diving into David's psyche. But it also starts to reveal a much deeper story to David. And it starts to raise a lot of questions too, because as Sid mentions herself, is what are we if not the stories that we tell ourselves? If we are not the memories that we remember ourselves having, what are we? That is the format of who we are. That serves as our identity. If we can't trust our own memories, our own past, then who we are is ultimately a mystery. And that's sort of the question that Sid gets to play with a little bit throughout this episode. Because we find out there's a lot more going on. We're finding out that, David's attack onto his doctor wasn't just to take some money to get drugs, but in fact was a way to get information, all the tapes that the doc makes. This is so that he can take those and destroy them. Why? Because something has been said. Some aspect of himself has been revealed. And this is why we're running into the memory glitches constantly in these scenes. But even the small things, like the dog. His dog as a kid never existed. They never had a dog. That's completely fabricated memory. But then, of course, the big thing also is Benny. Yes, Benny, our male friend during David's drug days. Not Lenny, the female friend that was inside the hospital. Now, I'm going to get to Lenny in just a little bit. And remember, this is why I was saying, there are some issues of whether or not the same friend that's out in his drug days could be the same one that's in the hospital. And no, they are at least two different people, if not something else and above that. But that lets us in of how much we cannot trust all of these memories. Everything that we have seen through David's eyes, we can't trust. Which also lets us know that everything that we have seen in these past couple of chapters, all of that is really up in the air as well. So this leads us eventually, of course, to the whole doctor scene, which was beautifully done. And I have to say, I'm glad Carrie had her moment of combat, just aching to get into the fight throughout the whole episode. But it was a very cool sequence that was done. The eye apparently can make you think that he's someone else. I don't know if he can actually transform or if it's a mental projection type of thing. Don't really know this whole scope of his powers. But one of it does seem to be bulletproof or bullets not affecting him. And that was the only small little critique that I have of that whole fight sequence there over at the lighthouse was that, okay, we've got our team inside, we've got the eye there disguised as the doctor, and the guys come out of the water and just start firing into the house. Which tells me they're not trying to bring them in alive necessarily. And it seemed also, well, if the eye is bulletproof, I mean, we had Ptonomy shooting at him later and it didn't have any effect. So if bullets don't affect him, he's bulletproof, they go through him, don't really know. Okay, I can understand the enemy team firing all of it in if they weren't trying to actually capture anyone, but killing them was just fine. I don't see how that would help them find David. But because of that, and also once the firing started, and we had Ptonomy and Sid get up and run through, and then Carrie running up behind them through all the gunfire, there's no danger to it. And while it was a cool visual, and it was a super cool visual in slow motion with everything breaking and flying and then running through, that looked great. But to me, it kind of removed the danger since there didn't seem to be any fear or concern of anyone actually being shot. That is my only critique in that scene. Otherwise, everything was great. The fight sequence, I love Carrie on the outside. And the two Carries, how through that whole sequence, they are mimicking each other's actions. As Carrie is fighting out there, then male Carrie back in the lab is going through the same motions. I love that whole overlay and interplay of stuff as well. It's kind of giving a double emotional reaction to everything that they were going through. I thought was great and wonderfully done. The eye obviously knocking out powers. I loved how Sid turned that around with the big high five at the end and forced that switch. That was just a beautifully done sequence, great use of mutant powers without being necessarily huge and big and flashy, but just making stuff move along. I thought it was just beautifully done. Now, David's side of the story in this, I think, was really cool. And I think it says something is that we actually don't hear a word from David or see any part of his story outside of him just sitting there on the bed unconscious in the lab. For the first half hour, I think it clocked at like 31 minutes before he has his own scene and says his own and actually speaks a word. So I thought that was another great evidence of pulling us into the story and how David, while central to this, still can have everyone work around him and still carry it forward. I just thought it was a very cool way of telling his part of the story. And as he comes in there, it changes from an area of kind of like terror and horror to almost whimsy when we have David floating there in the astral plane. And I loved how when Oliver first showed up, he just kind of did the little like, hey. And then looked, it was just a cool, like, minor little moment and very believable in David's character. So we get to follow him, and this is our introduction to Oliver Bird, Melanie's husband, who she is crying over evidently in a diving suit, frozen cold. Don't really know again what exactly he went through, but it's been a while. Apparently since the 60s, he has been trapped in there, and this is now much later, current, again, we have no specific timeline, but we can say relatively current, kind of like the whole X-Men thing is the near future type thing. And he is here to sort of give us a bit more of an insight into what is happening with David. And here we get to see that it's not the devil with yellow eyes is not just David. We get to play with that through this episode because we're seeing his dark side and his attack on the doctor and everything else, is that David has this dark side that maybe he was trying to protect Sid from. And his concern, of course, is that this is something inside of him, as Oliver relates, a monster is an allegory, as a reference to some personality side of himself. But it is not, and Oliver is very specific about that. This is not a monster as allegory. This is an actual monster. This is a creature that is living inside of David's head and hiding there and influencing. And it is him who is altering David's memory. Appears to be, again, everything is uncertain, so we're going with the best information that we have. But it appears it's the devil with the yellow eyes that is occasionally taking over David, or pushing him to act aggressively, negatively, very different. I mean, it was good when we had those scenes with his ex-girlfriend, because we got to hear tales of, or even in those moments where Amy was talking with Kissinger, which I'll touch on in a minute, we get to hear how David was a very innocent child, a very, very happy, and then things just started happening and starting developing. So I'm assuming at some point within this, the devil with the yellow eyes attached himself or inserted himself into David's psyche, and that has been kind of the cause of all of these problems going forward. So we have great scenes in there with Oliver, and then we get to run back into Lenny, who they do some great back and forth before Lenny drops a line before pushing him to get out. Got to get out, got to rescue your girl. Why? Because I have things to do, is what Lenny says. And David grabs her a minute of like, wait, what things? But then she pushes right through and motivates him to go and save his girl, which he does in beautiful fashion. If that's what's going to kick you out, excellent. But this dives into a lot of mysteries of who Lenny actually is. Is Lenny a personality absorbed after being killed in the mental hospital? No, I don't think so. If there was a Lenny, and we could probably assume that there wasn't, because it's not just David that saw her. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. Lenny did interact with both Kissinger and Sid. So there seems to have been a Lenny, and there seems to have been a Benny. These seem to be two different people. And then Lenny was actually killed. But I think that the devil with yellow eyes is using the guise of Lenny now to interact with him in a more straightforward fashion. That is my theory right now, is that Lenny, the Lenny in David's mind, is the devil with yellow eyes. And that is the interactive personality side of this demon creature that needs David to get out so that the devil can use David's body to do whatever it needs to do. Oh, and I also have my suspicions that imaginary dog might have been the first manifestation of the devil with yellow eyes. And also, like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, this is why I do believe that the devil with yellow eyes is the Shadow King or a creature such as that. Now, Shadow King had an identity, Farouk, if I remember correctly, but that wasn't his actual identity. That was a person, an Egyptian, I think, who the Shadow King took over and then used as a body. But the Shadow King itself could be one of those immortal creatures, could have been around for thousands of years, could have been a first psychic who then, as the body died, was able to transfer his psyche to someone else and thus live on that way. Or it could be a mantle that several powerful telekinetic psychics have used. I'm going to go with more of the former one and think of this like an ancient type of creature that has now transferred its consciousness into David's mind but can't take it over because David is, in his own ways, way too powerful. So that's sort of my theory on what Lenny is. And especially as you see that final scene reaching over David and kind of as the manipulator right there. Lenny, that dark, that manifestation of Lenny is much darker inside, and I think this is the direction we're going to see things pan out a bit more in the upcoming episodes. Just a couple of small points here. One, David trying his powers was hilarious. When he's in the ice cube with Oliver, and he's like, "Well, I'm supposed to be some super powerful mutant, so I guess I'll figure it out." I mean, that was just, it was great. There was so much actual heart in there. Like, yeah, I'm really trying because I'm supposed to be able to do this. And isn't this what people do when they're trying to use their things? Anyway, I just thought it was beautifully done. The scenes with Amy and Kissinger. One, glad the two of them got together. Glad Amy gets to know, God, she's so being tortured in that strange slanted prison room. But the two of them getting a chance to actually sort of connect. We get to hear more. That's where we hear about the little bit more into David's past and his sweetness and everything else. But I love that moment when the guard went by, because for a second, as we see that scene with Kissinger in there, I'm thinking this is just one of those false walls that they've taken away so we can see what two rooms next to them. But then when the guard walks by and they both kind of react and drop, it's like, is this an actual wall? Is this plexiglass? And yeah, we'll see later on in the scene, you can actually see it is a giant plexiglass wall so they can see through. Whether it can't be a one-way mirror because we're assuming that she was actually reacting to seeing the guard coming by. But anyway, just a cool scene, a cool sequence. It's nice to see what's going on with Amy, but just that visual I thought was just, again, the show is amazing with their visual storytelling. Carrie and Carrie, we got to hear a bit of their story. A little convoluted, a little strange there, I guess. It was just weird when they said they were having a daughter and then 9 months later, the white boy comes out. How do you know 9 months before you're having a daughter? But anyway, that's minor. It was good to kind of hear that storytelling and to see the two sides of them. That male Carrie does all of the boring stuff, going to the bathroom and sleeping and eating and doing all of that, where Carrie just comes out and have fun. Also, female Carrie only ages when she's outside of male Carrie's body. So that's why she's so young and he's so old, though they're technically the same age. Anyway, and it was just great seeing that other side of personality there. Carrie's total willingness and desire to fight was great. When she's walking through the forest and says, "This would be a great place for a fight with helicopters and ninjas on, speed lines and all that." I mean, it's just, I love that. Wonderful character work and just great levity in the midst of all of this psychological, yeah. And then we had those few scenes where Sid is seeing the angry boy from the book, which I thought was very cool. I mean, in the sense that she poses to Ptonomy early on in the episode is, how do we know that we are in the real world and not still in David's mind? And I thought that was quite appropriate, especially since we had to question so much of what was real within David's memories, within David's mind. There was constant question of, the question of whether or not they were actually out or still in there, I thought was quite appropriate, and is one that could have been asked constantly throughout this episode and still kind of have an uncertain answer to that, because everything was so weird and odd and offset. I thought that was a great point of view from looking at things. But with her seeing this, while it seems like they must be trapped inside of David's mind, I think this is just this is just a result of her connection to David, because they've had that little mental connection, because they'd kind of switched places. I think her attunement to David is allowing her to start to see these flashes much like he does. So yes, I think that they're outside of his mind, but I like that Ptonomy wasn't even certain for a moment there. But I think these are insights. This is a result of her connection to David, and going to pursuing those further questions of what is the actual truth of his childhood. And that's going to be another big one, I think, that's going to play out to be quite telling. All right, so I think that's going to wrap things up for this week. There is so much. I could probably continue talking for another half hour. At that point, you might as well just go and rewatch the episode again. But just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of insight, a lot of interplay, and a lot of just beautiful visual overlay. Even that scene between the fight where we have Oliver dancing and the fight going on and the choreography and just everything playing over each other, I thought was just amazingly beautifully done. But we are halfway through this season. This is it. It's 8 episodes long. We just finished up 4, so we're halfway through. And the story's going to be ramping up here from the previous 4 next week. It looks like Lenny / Devil with Yellow Eyes might be taking over David's body, and that's going to cause some definite problems. We'll have to sort of wait and see. So, if you did enjoy this review, please hit that like button. Thoughts, ideas, comments, throw them down in the section below. What are you thinking? What grabbed you out of this episode, and what are you looking forward to? Throw those down. We'll keep a little dialogue going. I love everything that everybody has put down there in the comments that we've had, so please keep that up. You can always catch me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at Darren Jakes. Now, of course, we are doing this. This is going up to the end of March. We're also doing The Walking Dead and Black Sails. Now, this weekend, we have Logan coming out. Everything on that looks amazing. And then later this month, we have Iron Fist over on Netflix dropping out. So, what a month. It's going to be a heck of a year. If you guys haven't seen the previews for Guardians, the new one that just dropped, that also looks awesome. So it's going to be a heck of a year. We're going to be talking about a lot of it right here with all of our reviews. So if you don't want to miss anything, make sure you're a subscriber. And if you're not, you can become one with one little click of my face. It's right there. Go ahead and click that and you won't miss anything. And what I'll do is I will throw up our latest review of Black Sails right over here, and you can check that out. So, I'm going to say goodnight. I am D, and I'm out of here. Catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.